few years, 2 years, it's hard to remember exactly when we met, but I do know the circumstances in which we met. We share many friends there, and it's interesting that somehow we can meet it, amongst those communities and find our way back to Asia. It's actually rare to find ourselves back here. Yeah, I think so. Just to kind of start a bit, I'm going to read Phil's bio. Melding historical and literary references with poignant personal experiences, Liu's work tells stories of dissonance and longing through twirling odysseys of ancient mythologies that carry the echoes of trauma, transformation, and regeneration. His sculptures and paintings are made of burnt wood panels, linen, and grey metal, and concrete, and more, I would say, with elaborate scenes of a mythological retelling. Through pyrography, or writing with fire, and the use of extensive and subversive titles for his works, Liu returns to the poetic origins of storytelling that liberate his work from established linear hierarchies of thought and form. The profound meditative and laborious repetition of his burning spans greatly in scale, from intimate to immersive, and allows Liu to build worlds where mythological and autobiographical comes together and are less straightforward. This is your first time showing again. First time showing in like Taipei. Yeah, this is my first time. First time showing, first time as an adult. So this is, I think Lou is here. So I just want to say Lou's first time showing in Thailand is a massive kind of site-specific installation at Bangkok Art Biennale at one of the temples. But also before that, Lou, the call, sorry, I keep calling you Lou because I'm like seeing this. But Call has also shown work at Chapter in New York, Herald Street in London, near Alderman in Munich, Company Gallery in New York, and also the Drive Center in New York, the IC in Philadelphia, the Contemporary Art Museum in St. Louis, La Casa Encendida in Madrid, and the Poster Arts Foundation, and also in St. Louis. Cole also writes a lot, and his writings appear in Coffee House Press in Minneapolis, Wonder, and the Seventh Wave in New York. He has a publication, Smells Like Contempt, published in 2015, which is in the Artist Book Collection Museum of Modern Art Library. So I wanted to actually, before we start talking about the work in the Bangkok Art Biennale, I wanted to ask you a bit about hierography, yes, and the different mediums that you use in your work. Hierography itself, commonly known as wood burning, but it's basically a gesture of burning that you can apply on anything, but majorly on wood. Um, so I use it as a gesture of writing and rewriting, and then applying on various surfaces. So that's predominantly what I choose to make work right now, because in the word itself, pyrography, the Greek, actually means writing with fire. And then for me, well, the making is a form of writing and rewriting with myth. So then it makes sense for me as a like predominant form of gesture of making. Yeah. But how did you come to be using fire? I don't think I've ever seen work in this way that uses fire in this way that actually is kind of making residue in the art itself. Mm. Actually, it comes in such a very like a very unexpected surprise. I used to work a lot in like capital S sculpture, like sculpting, making mold, things that were great physically around it. But then after COVID, like when COVID hits, I'm really immune compromised. I'm unable to go to my studio. So I was thinking like, oh, what can I make as the origin of making? And at the time, we like can just in really challenging time, we tend to like go back to the core of thinking about like, okay, what's the origin? And the origin is in drawing in that way. Like, oh, the first idea comes from drawing, the great sketch, sculpture, everything comes from drawing. So thinking about drawing, but then how do I draw it? As an origin become a very interesting question for me. And then at the time I was making a lot of relief, kind of like historical, sort of mimicking the historical fact to trace back to like the origin of making. So I kept thinking, what's the origin of drawing and making? So I go back to cave painting. And then when we discover cave painting is a form of art, we are established a certain kind of civilization. And then that become one of the motif of making of okay, charcoal is the thing that we found out. What is the for charcoal? It's fire. So if I want to rewrite that history or provide a potential imagination of the rewriting, I think using fire, a step before that, is the way to rewrite it. So then it becomes my medium of drawing. Yeah.
And I guess also this the the desire to set things on fire. I don't know if that comes into this or because I don't know what it looks like when you're making. I've seen certain photos of you holding a kind of torch.
Yeah.
Like what's that sensation like?
That's a really good question. I think it's interesting thinking of making from a destructive force, but then it goes up addition adding on it. So it does feel like really for me it has a two extreme feelings. With wood is more forgiving. I can like press more energy on it, press more strength on it. There's a lot of possibility of changing when I make it, but it also is not. When I burn it, it's gone. So for me, it was always this tiptoe idea of like focusing when I'm making, and I keep me on the edge. And I think that part kind of keep me alive as an artist. Don't feel like I'm complacent. Keep doing the same thing because if I'm not looking or paying attention, it's gonna burn off as you just be gone. So that's part of the branding is kind of like really adrenaline charging, but also delicate, require a lot of attention, and I like the push and pull.
When it starts, like, because you work with somebody who work with wood, but you also work with all these different materials. Is it like one blank sheet, and then you just start making the drawing?
I sent everything actually like in the clinical space. Like I don't work everywhere. I have my drawing pad and my pen, and I just sketch it. And usually I sketch really like obsessively. And I have a lot of them. And sometimes I don't know what to think about them. I have a certain idea, but then the image and the material itself, the marry, takes a little time. And then deciding how to execute it takes a little time. And then in the end, so it's never an immediate thing. It's like I have to make a sketch, think about it, feel like, okay, this is probably this is probably wood, and then go with that. And then the process is like sketch on the wood, burn the line, torch the wood, and seal that. Like all the material process is varied from different things.
And I want to go back a little bit to what you were saying about how during the pandemic you were thinking about the origin of art, and you're thinking about cave art, and you're thinking about maybe, for example, like what Aboriginal people call rock art, like in Australia. Because it's interesting because I think that when the caves in France were discovered, this idea that it's almost like there's like the cave art, and then there's kind of like, and then the next work of art that is reported is like much later. But so I'm also curious about this idea, and I think those ideas also differ across places. Like, for example, in the Northern Territories in Australia, Aboriginal people thought rock art because they know and made those or the artistic lineage. And now the oldest cave art has been found in Indonesia. Yeah, that's the way. So it's like the oldest art like work in the world right now that exists as an artwork is in Asia. And I wanted to ask you as well about this idea of like the origin. Could it, you speak about this origin at the same time your work dealing with mythology and repetition is also, I feel at least not as interested in kind of a sense of origin as dominance, but rather origin differently. So I wanted to ask about what you think about the idea of origin.
Yeah, definitely. I think the idea of origin is actually based out of narrator, like who gets to stay as a narrator, they narrate about origins. So I never really think we actually know about origins. So for me, that also is a reality exists right now in the world. It's like we kind of rediscover ourselves or rediscover or reestablish ourselves over and over again through these like historical artifact and facts. We'll find out that oh, we consider something as art and in a way that we see face or label them as art, but many things are art itself has a form of resisting. And then I think people who make cave painting at the time never think of them as decorative. It's a form of journal. It's documentations, is a way of being. Singing as art is a way of how they should just intertwined with life in general. But we live in a society now that's separated. Like this is life things. You like make a table from the wood. But if you like do it refinedly or whatever, and as art, why? It's all made from you. Like I wanted to challenge the hierarchy too. Yeah.
And here, maybe you can go to the next slide, because this work is made of burnt birch. And then we have thinking by cover. I wanted to kind of share some of these works and just to show the different media played on. You want to speak to that? But
Yeah, this is made out of copper plate, and then I think most of them they think like related to burning or that kind of incisive engraving. It's all gestures of refer to prehistoric ways of making. Like before you find out it was meant pen or palette, what you can do is you just kind of trying to chase the shape, and then for that purpose. So the engraving is one good way of doing that. And then I think that itself is also thinking about telling story, dissemination. At the time, and historically, we kind of like read a lot of writing and story. We like copperplate engraving, and then you see the print. And that's how we understand love stories with the illustration. But I don't want them to be a print. So I decided the work itself is a cardboard plate. And then that thing itself actually cannot be print over, or like it will be really obscure to defeat the purpose of that. So like kind of challenging the idea of like mass reproduction object becoming like a single object itself. You know, yeah.
and for example, for this specific coffin work, that like it looks like a bit of a map.
Yes.
And is it kind of an imagined map, or is it meant to be read? Is it meant to guide?
That's a really good question. So, it is a map and it is an imaginary map. But then the more specific thing about this map is actually the perspective of that. So this perspective is not very common or not historically. If you trace historically, you look at the map like horizontal or like vertically, and then this is almost like a fantasy, imaginary map. But if you go back to way ago, like in like Aboriginal people, when they started documenting the geographic landscape and creating photography, this is how it was documented. It's not based out of like one dominant country, one perspective kind of map. What I learned from that was that when I went to Madigan, and there's a hallway of map, and then what I learned is everything in that hallway is all reoriented from the direction and perspective of Rome. And then that will never happen in this map or in the before. So that's how I ended on and taking back the map, how we see geography at the time. And then I also have some fragment that I implanted in a composition, which is like some sculpture and then some work that I made before. So then it's also a map of the certain imaginary narrative origins. Like you enter story, video game, we start with a map. So that was the idea of this.
There's something, yeah, because it's very much speaks to like the world building lexicon, like in fantasy books or in sci-fi. Often they can read the book, watch the movie. It opens with a map.
Yeah, exactly. So kind of like playing with the myth or reading into like a storybook. So you have the idea of like introducing a new landscape. Yeah.
And you have made so many works in the last few years too, and they all connect somehow.
Actually, every work in the past and now, they all connected as a larger narrative. So the fun part for me is every time I make a new work, I can decide at the timeline of this piece and when it was unearthing. So then it create a different possibility of storyline. And then I never really planned a larger grand narrative. I think I just lived through my life, and then the work kind of like reflect to a lot of reckoning and reflection, and then that weave into like a straining in the larger sense.
But I like also this idea that, like if we examine each and every one of your works, that you could also like add to that world, because really good world building projects are such that the foundation is strong. So like I could also be like, oh, let me introduce the character.
Yeah, yeah, basically.
Wait, can we go to the next slide?
Sure.
Well, this one's on this one. Maybe we should try the next one.
Yeah. Okay. Oh, it's made out of cast bronze. So that was the only thing with the title, with the material. But yeah.
And okay, can we go to the next slide?
Yeah.
Yeah, this one. So this is you don't work as much with silicone nowadays, do you? Or
Yeah, and that's the thing. Before I start the entire branding process, I think so much about like the fragment and the history is actually also from human embodied. So I wanted to be like a bodily formed sort of fragment. So at the time I was working with materials like aqua resin and fiberglass, basically is resin made out of water birds. And then the way it was cured and finished is like ivory. So it's like a bone color. Um, so I was thinking that as a foundation of how I wanted to carve a relief and then cover it with skin, literal like of a synthetic form of skin, and then as idea of like relic and relief. So that's the past work.
could you share a little bit about what we see here?
Yeah. What we see here is actually a romaine bar, guys. So it's kind of like a cross section of that, and you can see that the shoes working on the back. And the inside, the protagonist is Bulgarian, but I sort of implanted him in my storytelling as like an autograph biographical perspective. So he's swimming, and then sitting next to it is his two-head dog Orthrus, which is also in the mythology of like Hercules' labor and Gerian's carol. So this is something that would never have ever happen to the Romaine Bell because I think like I was referring to like the class hierarchy of the Tron. Like if you're a normal person, you can't really take a bath. Not to mention like anything as others. You know, he sits in like a public bathhouse. So that was kind of challenging for the hierarchy. And then that piece was made in like a thinking of just like a statement, of like a moment. I was like it's really shot. Okay, but also I was thinking about water too, like in the waterfall. Here's always one he listen to the voices and Chris also stable freeze. I water stirs so much in like the history of migration and being. So that was always kind of like a floating existence, and I was thinking when I was making the word, but yeah.
And yeah, I was thinking about how you say that, each work somehow you can also pick which timeline to focus on. Yeah, but also it seems that sometimes like each work, it could be a moment in time where it can be a duration of a time. And I want to go to the next slide so we can kind of share. Sorry, I could have pictured you. I have no idea of making the word.
Um, right. This is pretty. This is actually just a new story. Um, like like the that you know, a way there. Yeah.
Okay, can we go to the next slide as well?
Okay.
Because in thinking about time, this is like in progress, so you're more so just like, when we spoke before today, you're talking about this work as a kind of portal.
Yeah.
Um, could I ask you to kind of share more about that?
Yeah. I think since things are kind of connected with different timeline, when I was thinking about time, it's actually such a abstract idea to pin down to. I heard a theory. I'm not sure where it's quote from, so I can't directly quote, but it was saying like how we human feel about time is based out of the event that happens and back. So if you're in a state of like very still, very few events happen, time feels like extremely unrecognizable. So that's how I think about like, oh, the past year or 2 years almost feels like 30 years with the events of happenings and everyone. But that for me thinking about like the circle of life and the loop and how we think of different timeline is all form of flow. As I also think that I also think that our physical form is just a way of existing. There are many things that we don't know. That's how I would say. But Portal of itself is less about spiritual aspects, more about like the potential of immediate time travel, but or a potential of connected things happen fragmentally through a timeline in life and provide possibilities or hope in a way. So Portal for me is always like it can be like an extreme lesson of tragedy, but that was just like a vortex over the entire thing, and as an entering point and ending point were many things.
Can we see the next slide? Here it is.
So yeah, so for this, it's actually originally I was thinking and inspired by the movie The Prestige, which is talking about like two magician. They are in, giving to each other when entire life they're nemesis, and they have this magic trick called like, the transported man. Basically, is a trick of like you open the door and immediately appear on the other side of the stage without any visible movement. And then that itself is a form of portal, but it's also incredibly hard to achieve magic trick. And then these two rivals somehow made their way to the that trick. So in the end, spoiler alert, one of the magician is a twin. So he's able to do that with his twin. But then he sacrificed one person's life because his entire life is built on one persona. And this other person magically found Kessler able to make like find a clone of him each time when he performed the trick. So he killed himself 100 times, like his identical self, to make that happen. So in a way, I was thinking like this model of transition of right how we see ourselves to get to this stage, and then we doing again, or how we believe in such. Using that film to think of like the way of killing self to exist in like the social realm. And then that was something that I kept thinking over and over again in every form of life. Kind of ego that, yeah, many times.
And so, in thinking of making this portal for the Bangkok Art Biennale, when you put it into which temple is it?
Is a wabawam.
And how did that? Did you? Because I saw that you made some adjustments too after you painted there. You were making work there too. So
Okay, I touch up. Yes, we did make a little adjustments, but the whole body of work is thinking and design in response to the space and even stepping the form and the history of Wapawan. Like for me, it was like I always want to make a portal, but why this portal is here? You know, how did it get here in relation to everything here? Like it is so lucky and fortunate that I can was like working with Junko and Nova and then EFP and then Bangkok Kunsthalle to be able to be here in Thailand to kind of like get to know Bangkok on a personal level. So for me, this what also need to speak to that as well. So I was thinking about the order of existence. So at what for one, this two gate becoming responding to the structure of the building, including the height or the and its original like Gothic design, which is somehow incorporated in the when they deciding to make the museum and library. So it's kind of repeating that form to make two extra portal in the center. So kind of it is repeated it in the root or within the space as a circle of blooded. So that was something that drawn to me and did make number. Initially, I was thinking we were only thinking about one gate as a portal, but after my research trader, I think we need two as a gate. So the second gate is this of Lenin. It's from Lenin, and then it's all. And then the reason of that decision is also because I learned that in traditional blessing, the monk will hold a fan, and then this to avoid eye contact, and the blessing is only coming into the fan and the pepper. So that for me is a really important gesture of that part of it just to maintain within the cycle too. So that becoming like a decision I decided to like, okay, this needs to be two, and now we need to go to like have a blue portal to actualize it. So that's the decision in the end for the installation.
and have you walked from the portal?
Yeah, after installing it, and I cannot walk through the Linux, but I did, and then yeah, it feels kind of just meant to be for the space because it was made for the space, even with the height, the distance of viewing, and then things to come in different directions. So that was unexpected that it also fit in this space for me. Yeah.
And right now, the short title's the engineers.
Yes, the show and title of the work is called of engineers. Basically, it's challenging the idea of like engineers as like a creation of beings and human beings, and they can be replaced the name of God, alien, or anything, but it's a form of belief system, and I'm trying to challenge, question, or acknowledge that belief system by this gait and gesture. But at the same time, I also have not finished the longer composed title for this yet. Yeah.
Because, as we saw in some of the previous slides, there's like the work titles are quite long, right? And I wanted to also, we've also published writing. Yes, and poetry is very important. I want to ask about the role of writing, like in your life and in your practice.
Thank you. Writing is quite important as much as reading for me, I think. My father is a librarian, so, I grew up very comfortable in the reading situation. It's actually provided me a lot of comfort zone. And writing is a way to kind of like affirm the making and thinking. So the part of the poetry writing lately it becomes so tightly married into the work. Obia was also because it's a way to like confessional liberated act and combine with all the making. So every time I'll make the work, material, composition, finished branding, I have to actually take a full chunk of time to sit down and write about it. And then the writing is almost the most important part to make the work. So for me, they are the final frame of the work, of that perspective, or the reckoning I wanted to like kind of insert in that. And they can be largely invisible for the viewer too, because people don't really look at a piece of work and are eager to search its title. But for me, for those who want to, then I'm excited about the clash of the visual experience and how they read it. So definitely in the very exciting private part, but only me as an artist will know.
I mean, I find like your work is so like alchemical, because the kind of magic that is imbued is like it's like real magic, It's like what happens to the procedure. That's like real magic. It's not a trick. So, well, the twin is a trick, and the other one is real.
Yeah.
But then somehow it's like the titles, and the writing that comes after is finished, and through I don't know if it's finding closure or rather kind of writing a spell. It's like the title like breathes life into the work itself. It kind of brings it to life, and we actually picked a few of them to kind of share to talk about today. You can go to the next slide. Yes. So So on the 17th day, he awoke from the cave while others were still sleeping. He thought only one day had passed, but the sundial was all weathered and aged, decades over the night. No one outside the cave speaks his language anymore. He pointed to the night sky where he needed to be, but everyone around him could not see. I took the bus that I was told to take and I got off. Well, it was the very last stop, so I had to get off. I asked the driver, was this Brooklyn? And he nodded yes. When he was from one of those foreign countries where they think it's good manners to nod at everything, even you have no idea when it is you're nodding at. And in truth, I think he spoke no English at all, which I think would make him ineligible for employment on public transportation. The public being English speaking, Moshe, do you speak English? The line leaking the Mari.
A long title. That's one word title. Yeah, that's one word. This piece, we talked about title first before yeah, this piece is a little bit of a responding to material that with it, but a lot of reckoning is the first part is the mythological sense of like a person almost referring to like the seven sleepers, or the mythical sense of like sleep in a cave, time passed, you woke up, a different world, you're a new person. And then it's one of those moments you arrive somewhere, you realize, I don't belong here. How would I get here? And we have many, many moments of that in life, either geographically or life stage was. So that was one of the reckoning. And then point in the nice that we needed to be is kind of in the mythological story referring where Garen was coming from is about the moon. So he's like pointing, that's where my man lives there. But no one can see it because no one was from there. He was being taken from the moon to Earth. Is referencing to transatlantic slave trade too. It's like, oh, you're at your home, you wrapped to this land, and then all of a sudden you just assimilate. This like unknown you become the other in a place that you didn't assign to. So that's one of the reckoning. And then second part of the quote is actually from the play Pagers in America, one of the singer. And then I was talking about this idea of how you see the other in a way. And then the play itself has a lot of influence on you. Like it's about like the Holocaust Jews, is about like HIV, is about like this minority existence, confronting yourself, like have different reckoning of like, am I a gay man? Is church women going on? And all these like really painful intertwine from of existing somewhere in New York and where I am. So for me, that was also one of the big influence. I've tried a bit to kind of recreate a scene of like very subtle, very common, everyday passing kind of microaggression language, but actually not micro at all.
Yeah, it's interesting because it's like the first like section is it's hard to place it. It feels like it could be a very long time ago, maybe, but not exactly sure when we're in the tickle. And in this language, I think, I mean, the cave always evokes a potato, I think, and you know, the kind of, and then what's nice is also there's cave art. But then the second one is, it's like one of the few times that I remember under titles or a place's name. So yeah, clearly that's a lot like a Fed hostel space. Like Brooklyn is the place, and you live in Brooklyn.
Yes.
Yeah. And so I like that this pairing together is quite interesting because it brings a lot of you into it, you know, and if you because you grew up in Taiwan, right?
Yeah.
And you find yourself a boyfriend many years later.
And many years later. I also want to point out this piece, even though it's dated 2021 when I made it and titled it, it was during COVID actually. And it was all the actually it's like a really terrible 2 years being like in what I was in. I mean like a lot of injustice. So a lot of it is like it's constantly on my mind too, like how do we get here now? So and then I lived there, so I reference you where that I'm in Brooklyn. And then that's how I end up to be. And then so all the minor fragmented details are kind of weaved into the writing as well. So sort of confessional in Outland.
Okay, well that's too much then. But maybe we can go to the next slide to look at the work.
Yeah.
That this title is waiting for it to go.
Yeah, so the composition is one of this like older kind of like Antigua lands, like what is it called here? It's called Antigua lands, I think. It's one of those like early you have two furry weapon. Look, things look like realistic and more it looks like reality. Yeah, it's like looks like me. Yeah. So it was a image and then underneath that this marble is engraved with like a gesture of a figure that kind of handing a stick to another person, but actually pulls them in their wings, because they're not human. In that way, like the other, the one of and then underneath that is sort of like a self portrait of the being holding the sun, and then undergoing. So that was sort of like the composition of that a lot of fragmented, bigger character that exists in different form and story, but this piece itself, despite all the fragments with story. If you look from this side, I don't know if there's next slide. Can we check? Yeah, if you look from the side, it's composed with the from the sundial. So that's also referring to time. Yeah, so that was a lot of time in the making, I think, about form and an historical object. And I think I'd like to build story on the object already have history. So kind of like rehistoricize it.
Do you see your work as like a building a secret language, or rather, because on the other hand, I was like that to look really close in reading all those titles, like you can figure it out. But I'm not sure because I know you already, so it's hard to unknow what you've had your opinion.
I think it is a form of secret language, but they're not named yet. I wouldn't say it's a secret language. I would say a way of connecting things and making meaning out of that. Which is a language. I think language is constantly changing and evolving. And then in that way, if I don't name this language, it's a free language, portable radio in my mind.
And also this the world that you built in.
Through the time they were not supposed to or so hard to exist. The way to exist is that they become a story, they become a cautionary tale, they become a fable, they become something more digestible, like the mother push under the off the bow, and then oh, those paintings come under the warrior, and that's a myth. But we know the reality, but we can't accept that. So for me, mythology is an abstract machine. It abstract reality. So then we can document and carry him on, and then later we unravel it. So that for me is a way to record things and respond to things really rightfully, but also can be very honest within that realm of mythology, not speaking in like actual language or actual reference in reality, because that tend to be hard to continue doing that and then exist in the time that it was only meant to be a little needed.
You can go to the next slide. There it is standing, and then the nest, and the final. The story of stone goes back far enough as if it never had it. So cause all myths are the distilled patterns of two sides fast. If you can see far enough, sometimes when the planets aren't alive in, what they do is crashing into one another. When that happens, you can't always see the damages, like the evening that stretches endlessly when the green light devours the black sun in Mother's backyard. Philosopher's Stone. Yeah. One of the reasons I was drawn to pulling this one out of the many works was Philosopher's Stone is like the apostrophe is after the S meaning that it's like many philosophers. Right? I don't like that's what I was actually very curious about. And also, like like the Chinese scholar rock in Lintarati tradition, like it's also very popular in Korea. 11. I should have put a picture of this, but like in the kind of Chinese ink tradition of art or East Asian, there's like these beautiful rocks that have these holes, and people make these. Oh yeah, let's send yeah, you want to plate them. It's like in the film Parasite, they have the scholar. Yeah, yes, and then so in a way like that is the philosopher's stone, like actually in a way. So I was very curious about like why the short title is philosopher's stone, and is it many philosophers? And then other than that, what the rest of the story is telling us.
It might be really interestingly as a capital like that type mistake in its sort of way as how I want to refer in philosopher's stone. I think in alchemy, philosopher's stone is like a cure, like for poison, like exile, like of life, like cure for that. And then the word itself is actually a stone. That in one way, that's how it was referred to. This literal, but also not questionable because we never think philosopher's stone is a stone. Like in many stories, a reference of a certain cure or potion. Um, but this piece is referring to the beginning of the story, this like stone, how do we cure ourselves? And then we're very later in the fact of like talking about being lion, eating the black sun, that is referring to an alchemy reference of purification. So a lot of like in alchemy, black sun, more black sun has also many used, like in Nazi German, it was like the symbol is black sun. So that was also one of the reasons using that. But green lion eating black sun in alchemy is like a chemical purifier. And I was thinking about like, oh, you eat the black sun, you become gold. And then what is the meaning of purifying? And then like in what way? So it's mostly question the mentality of that stage rather than an answer or a commentary. So this piece is sort of like listing their question in that sense. We think we can look at the next slide so we can see the word. Yeah. And then the stone itself is actually a gift from a friend in Glasgow, but who was just like, he had like many rocks and it stayed with me in my studio for years. And I kept thinking about what it means, like what the saying and what's in between that. And then I wanted to do something with it to respond to the work and take it the time. So that's how I later on like deposed the metal and the copper and weighting into the work. Yeah, so kind of in a way, it's like if an object exists, I scare it for a long time, and then I make around it. So you can see the way. What is this part holding with the stillness? That's a lion. like a hat, a face, or a close umbrella in. I don't know. There's a really famous rock in the museum in Taiwan. It looks like a hydroballistic, like pork belly, whole belt, like a British pork belly. So I think Hera is referring to.
Here we go to the next slide. And this is the last title that we chose together. And, um, 30 miles above his head, a thin layer of oxygen molecules forms a shell for life itself. While the actions of life are not so many, one he knew was that fever is a symptom of deeper problems, killing everything in him but him. In those few degrees, time stretched endlessly. Atoms collided together. The dust in his legs turned into burning stars. But
Yeah, so this uses referencing the idea of boat, the boat as time travel machine, or the boat also as internal time travel. Like, time travel is we're in a boat, but also a lot of time travel happen within here. But also talking about how time makes difference when you're in illness. So this is so all these are kind of a coding of a private personal event. So when I wrote this, it's actually responding to my personal illness of tuberculosis. And then the illness of that is basically your lungs are on fire. Everything is burning inside. It can't attain oxygen. So all I am thinking and able to do is meaning in with a certain amount. Or within that amount of time, like time is different than at a time. And then you feel like when you're really sick, you feel like it just reposes endlessly at a time. So in the second part of it, like, and collide together is almost like that internal universe, like exploration. So I like to play with this like landscape of universe outside of the planet or inside our body. So that was the thinking of that. And I use fire a lot in analogy and connected with volcano eruption. It also means like the illness internally, like fever or your lungs are on fire, anything like this burning inside, externalized to like the brain with like fire.
so it actually reminded me of like the idea of the atomic age, like in the Cold War. Because I think that like, talking about the molecules and the atoms colliding, and also because I think what I find so beautiful about your work and also the work title. So one of the beautiful things is how the creation of mythology in a world has this universal implication. It's like a kind of but at the same time you resist allowing for a grand narrative to be possible in that. And there's a process where things, the personal and the kind of universal, the line between them is actually not clear. But it's beautiful because, like, for example, even the way that you talk about this title coming from an illness to experience, and then there's a scalability in what's inside and what's outside. And at the same time, for example, the kind of political implications also often are described as illnesses, where when people say the society is sick, or like this is a terrible disease that we have. And so I find that process both, I think, mystifying, but also demystifying. Like, I'm not sure how, maybe if that's where it rests, is in the middle, but I don't know what you think about that.
That's a really good point. I think like most artists probably do the same thing. This demystifying self by me mystifying into something in the world. So then that becoming your language, and then you code it, and then maybe someone will know about you, talk to you about word, know about that language. So I think it's the same. In my mind, I think it's that. But on top of the rock itself is a petrified word. So it's a fossilized word. When the wood die, it's sort of like its cells get hollow, and then when the water and mineral come in, the wood become rock. So that itself is like I'm also challenging the idea of like a certain way of being, I guess. Like, it can exist in different ways, but they also can exist simultaneously as a void and as a rock. So letting heavy like feel. Actually, the petrified wood is not that heavy, but it's definitely sturdy, and you can feel the weight of it because it's all like kind of crystallize inside the marble wood. Yeah, underneath it is a cherry column, And then I think I used that term calling as a form myself. When I used the cherry wood at the time was when I first transitioned. So then it's a red that's by Pinocchio. He was carved from this cherry tree. So then when I make my first paragraphic veneer word, I use raw cherry because of that. So then cherry, cypress, pine, different kind of wood with its connotation, history, and meaning become my choice of medium as well. So they are all within living within half, but also like living in fine of mine too. But in my mind, that is could kill cereal boy. Exactly.
Is there anything you want to add before we up to questions?
Not really. I think I'm open for the main Q&A.
Yeah, so I don't know if there's any questions or if any even points of clarification, like kind of to ask about some of the stories or references. This is a good time to ask.
Thank you, Cole. That was really beautiful sharing. Thank you, and really loved it. And I think mine's less on question, just one in terms of you, because I love what Tom said going out about, fire being destructive and also having to the muscle process feelings or writing and feel like so a lot of this material, copper, stone, or wood, have you, when you let's say destroyed a bear or not happy a bear to bind it down, start new, one piece, or choose a new piece. The whole idea of using the same piece and write it down and do a metal line, right? How exists of the history, that might be quite interesting. Because I don't know, I wonder that, what your process with repeating or like destroying and then restart again, how do we kind of decide, make those decisions?
That's such a good question. Actually, when I'm not happy with the composition, usually when I'm really not happy with it, I actually just step away from it for a while and I'll come back. Or when I'm really unhappy with it, I will work over and over on top of it. I never walk away from that piece of wood or wood block that I'm working on. So that was actually a good realization too upon your questions. And then sometimes if I'm really not happy, I sand it down. And then the residue itself affect the color that goes into the wood grain and it becomes darker, become more aged, and that's telling in the work. And I kept that, and I like that element in it. For me, it's like when I start composing on that piece, I'm married with the process of finishing it. It's just depending on the timeline. And then the only time I will abandon the piece or like cap it aside is that I don't like it. I think the finish of the composition itself did not meet the virtue that I wanted, or the title itself is not there yet, and I can't think of it as done. So it has to remain private with me in the studio. But that's a great question. Yeah. Did I answer everything?
I was wondering, I guess, about you're talking about origins and how origins or our understanding of origins come from the place that we're viewing them from, and like as such they're kind of inscrutable, or the goalpost of understanding an origin is always moving. But I also recognize that a lot of your recent work has kind of been framed within the context of your return to Asia and Asia as a point of origin for you. So I was kind of wondering how all those two ideas together what you're made to work.
That's a good question. Thank you. That's a very thank you for that question. It's actually I was thinking incredibly personal as well. So how I grew up, how I came across to be an artist. I'm trained in the West. My first formal art education is my master education is in U.S. And then afterward, I established my career in making in the West. When I grew up as which is like a young adult in Taiwan, I was not an artist. I work in language, I work in translation, I work in music, I work in science before. And then these are the only possible way I can exist when I'm in Taiwan, face out of many things like society or education, family expectation, everything. And then And then till to the point I feel like I wanted to pursue what I like to do or to actually meaningful to me, study art. And then I never imagined I could stay or able to exist as an artist. And then somehow miraculously it happened to this point. And then for me, it was never, it's almost like a dream come true scenario that I can return to Asia as an artist. It was never something that I thought in my mind. And for me, it's a new existence as a person to be here, exist as an artist. For instance, this year is the first time I exist as an artist with my parents' presence. And that's kind of crazy to think about it. And so that brings a lot of reflection and perspective of me being trained in the Western canon and then throughout like 10 years of making till this point, how do I gradually kind of unlearn it and then re-understanding my relationship with making and where I'm from and also, but I'm still in the West and then what does that position mean and the potential connection I can do. So that's a constant thing on my mind. So yeah, so that idea of origin is interesting, right? Like when is my origin as an artist? Like I thought about it many, many times. But my origin of able to make is in US. But my origin of thinking and making is probably like since my dad took me to the cinema when I was 4 at a weekend. Or, he's going in the library that I just roaming around every day. Yeah. Did I answer everything? Yeah, thank you for sharing that. Thank you.
I'm wondering how where object creators, where they with or they need to their poetry, like collections of lines or standalone ons.
Really a great question. The title, I mean, like the poetry, they are all actually my titles, all of them. So, what I like about putting them in titles is kind of fighting this hierarchy. A lot of time when we put a work in the title, my title in either museum text, any kind of platform is way too long. I cause a lot of problem in a lot of system. And then that is interesting for me to fight the hierarchy, just kind of as like a lifting little finger. For me, it was like, yes, this can exist a proper task in a way. And at the same time, I also would love them to be read in the proper way as poetry. So title is a way for me to communicate the language object hierarchy. But then when I made it in a collection of book of poetry, I think it allowed me to actually look at them, treat them as texts, giving them the space that they need to have, and allow me an opportunity to kind of wrap them together in different section, thought process, and perspective. So I think looking at them as poetry for me it's a realization of how to learn about myself. Like I think everyone write. For me, I think writers write to learn about themselves. You write and you realize the kind of writer that first of you are. So yeah, so that's how that poetry kind of become for me later. A way of like self-discovery, but also liberating, and then seeing how they exist. Almost every like people who read the poetry, they didn't make the connection with the work, even if they all of my work. Right? Simply, there's just too many of the texts, and then that also gave me a lot of surprise as well. And oh, you actually read that before, but I'm glad it resonated differently. So yeah.
And Envy Qualifier from Septor. I suppose this question is about the relationship between history and fabulation. And a fabulation or theater storytelling. It seems that fabulation or storytelling is a key thematic or thread you practice. I'm very interested in how the engineers this new commission because it seems like this is highly site specific to this temple here in Bangkok.
Mm.
And this particular photo you've used, it also appears to be architecturally referencing a kind of Christian or cathedral form. The one tool is specifically, and SMRL was specific coming from that traditional architecture. However, there's decision in this Buddhist temple. So it seems like there's a very rich and complex history that you've located in this temple, and that you isolate what you just said, you know, how do you mean?
In fact, there's a little specific calculation of the storytelling that runs throughout your work. So I'm wondering if you've reflected a little bit about the south that you want in that the outlook is in that we get to see, and then to know a little bit how that relates to sort of making himself or inventing or the storytelling.
Thank you for the question. Yeah, that's a great question. So, if anyone have not been to Wat Bowong, it's an incredible, beautiful temple complex and mixed with like many different style of architecture. And then your traditional Thai Buddhist architecture, there's Chinese influenced roof, there's Indian Buddhist sculpture, and then there's this Wat Bowong library that is of like basically looks like a Catholic church that practices Buddhist lesson and practicing. So for me, I was thinking like that is also not a residue from a certain Stockholm syndrome from like colonization, physics of like liking a culture and how to embrace it and decide to collaborate with that. So for me, it's to embrace that architecture structure and then referring to the history of what is that by choice of doing, like in order to incorporate with that. And I think at the time when the temple was built, it was sort of a form of collaboration. So then to prove in like accepting a form of westernized notion is it's proven to be more civilized. So I was playing with the idea that civilization is rooted for knowledge. Knowledge arc is rooted in like Western education. So that was something that was like kind of at the backbone of thinking with the maintain it, but then architecturally, visually, I wanted to make it seamless to the space. So that's one of the options of choosing. And then another reference is actually Rodin's hair pal. Like that was the form that I was also looking into. And then into like reincorporated into like a history and views with like many different reference and culture and why is it here? And then the material itself is also through our research deciding to use Thai lean wood, which is saga oil, and have its permissive like healing and pharmacy purpose here at Bopo. So that also related to the functioning temple. In the past, it's a place of healing, a hospital, but it's a passing anywhere. So all of that is sort of responding to what that space is functioned for, and then how is in zoning for stuff. Yeah. I would say progress is a slow rain, but this year, luckily, like I did 3 large scale installation sculpture. I think I'm getting to a point like finally I want to figure out how to do it efficiently and then enjoyable, and then hopefully has to me and more successful. Yeah. So that's my it's a hard timing process.